Director of Indian Institute of Engineering Sciences and Technology, IIST Shibpur. Prior to this, he was a professor of Electronics and Electrical Communication Engineering and head School of Medical Science and Technology at IIT Kharagpur. He is having nearly 150 research papers and 6 US patents jointly with Intel Corporation. So now I would request to Professor Ray to please take over this stage as a session chair. Thank you.
Very good afternoon. We are now starting the next session, which is on quantum to consciousness. And post-lunch sessions are usually a little bit difficult to pass through. But I'm sure that the speakers are immensely qualified to keep you not only absolutely conscious, but then to be absolutely absorbed with whatever they will be speaking. In this session, we have got two speakers, Dr. Amit Goswami, who is an emeritus professor at the University of Oregon, USA, and Professor Bernard Heisch. He is from University of California at Berkeley. To start with, I would request Professor Amit Goswami. I will read out his small resume. Professor Goswami had his physics PhD from Calcutta University in 1964. Then served as a professor since 1968 at the Institute of Theoretical Science in the University of Oregon in USA, and taught physics for 37 years in USA. He was a senior resident researcher at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, author of many articles of diverse interests and 4 books, including Quantum Mechanics, The Self-Aware Universe, How Consciousness Creates the Material World, and Quantum Creativity. Professor Goswami, already we have tested the brilliant spark from him in the introductory session, and I will not take much time. And over to Professor Goswami. All of us, we are waiting for his great presentation on quantum consciousness. Professor Goswami, please.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I need to, besides thanking Professor Ray for his kind introduction, I need to thank the sense of humor of the organizers of this session. I mean, you have a wonderful opportunity here. You hear me talking about consciousness being the fundamental reality, and then we'll hear a very erudite, he's such a wonderful speaker, my friend Barney Heisch, who will try to prove just the opposite. It's all a hoax. So you will have an enormous opportunity to decide for yourself. Believe the world consciousness as reality, or to believe that consciousness is a hoax. All right, having said that, the organizers also did a very wonderful thing, because, usually I am not requested to write my speech in advance, but they requested it, and since they requested it, I complied. And so you have before you the proceedings of the conference, and that has everything. I have to say, it's already in there. And you can read, right? So, there's no need to repeat that speech, correct? And therefore, I'll spend this 45 minutes, 50 minutes with you to give you an overview of the quantum worldview, this new science, this new worldview, I hope, is developing and developing quickly because it needs to come to us. And it needs to come in a way where it's not a scientific worldview, but it's a people's worldview. Because we are not talking about scientists. Scientists don't have any leverage on consciousness that is any more special that you have your consciousness. Consciousness is one and only and the same one for all of us. This is the worldview that quantum physics is pushing us. Now, I need to make some statements because I don't know what you have heard about quantum physics. I was a little bit busy outside. But I understand all the basics you have already learned. So let me summarize the quantum worldview as a group of 10 aspects of the world, some of which we know, especially the Indian mind is very familiar with most of them. And then the question for you to ask is that we have this heritage, we know all this stuff, so why don't we practice it? And I hope you will engage with this question because my own experience was, because I was in the discovery process, but only because I went into the process along with doing it part, that the process actually happened. I don't think if I were an intellectual, then I could discover any of this stuff. It took doing. It took wanting to do it. It took wanting to transform. It took wanting to change my life, which was very unhappy and divided, and become happy and whole. Please try to comprehend this as I go through the pointers of the worldview. It's giving you an enormous opportunity of trying something that this country had for so many years, thousands of years. And now it's verified. Quantum physics, if it is anything, it completely verifies. There should be no debate about it. The debate is only arising because people are so incredibly prejudiced against something, just like religious people are in all cultures. Similarly, scientific culture also has become very prejudicial. Shouldn't be this way, but there is a scientific philosophy now which is called scientific materialism, which holds everything is matter. Now, even a cursory examination of the scientists themselves who think that way shows that if everything was matter, then these people would be zombies. You know? And there is a guy who is one of the few honest people who goes around in conferences and says, here's a label, here's a button which says, I am a zombie. But that's what the worldview says. Do any of the people believe that they are zombies? So my answer to materialists is that if you think you are a zombie, then why do you take yourself so seriously? You shouldn't. But by the same token, now I need to say what quantum physics tells that is different. So please, one by one. Number one, unequivocally, quantum physics is telling us that consciousness is the ground of all being. It is telling us that objects of experience are possibilities for consciousness to choose from. Now, how do I know? Okay, you've already heard that quantum objects are both waves and particles. But if they are paradoxes, no. I cannot analyze the paradox. My time will soon run out. But very quickly, mathematics is clear. Quantum mathematics says the objects are waves, and they are not ordinary waves. They are waves of possibility. And possibility obviously does not exist in the physical space and time, so they must exist in a different domain of reality called domain of potentiality. And then when an observer measures, that potentiality becomes actuality. Wave converts into particle. There's no debate about it. Everybody knows that. The debate is this mathematical reality, mathematics is man-made, should that be taken very seriously? Is this mathematical reality real? Is this domain of reality really real? What's the distinction of this domain of reality from space and time? Einstein and two of his collaborators in 1935 showed us how to discern. And then we sort of bogged down because the idea was very difficult to prove experimentally. To make a long story short, eventually a couple of guys came up with the ideas of how to do it, and a group in Paris, they really did it. They did the experiment. And the experiment showed clearly the way to discern between these two realities. In space and time, it turns out nothing can move faster than the speed of light. There's a speed limit. And in space and time, it turns out that material interactions require signal. There is no signal-less communication for material interaction. So signals always move with a finite speed. That's the rule. And therefore, in material interaction, material communication, communication always takes a little bit of time. We call it local communication, going through the space in between, so it takes a little time. What this French group discovered is that there are communications possible between elementary particles that takes no time, faster than the speed of light. Instant communication. Therefore, must be communication without signals. But we always know something must be in between, something must mediate. What is that mediator? Now here is the human mind. The human mind immediately postulated, especially the Western mind is very prejudiced, everything has to be material. So people gave a name to it. You will recognize such names if you have read the literature. They're called quantum field, or some people call unified field because they're coming from a elementary particle physics background, and there the idea of unified field is very popular. But unified field, quantum field, it all sounds like objects. We don't empower you if you see it that way. The crucial point here, it takes an observer to bring about the conversion of wave to a particle. So in the process of measurement, consciousness is involved, the observer consciousness. Then we ask the question, okay, what is the nature of the observer consciousness? And it's so simple to see that if you bring in consciousness, that consciousness has to be one. Eugene Wigner, who you hear mentioned here a lot, there is a statement by him, he's pictured great scientist. He gave us a paradox a long time ago. He said, well, the problem with the observer theory is that if two observers are looking at it at the same time, and it's observer that gets to choose what of the facets of possibility will become actualized, then suppose the two observers choose differently. One chooses this and one chooses that. Whose choice is the one that will be materialized, that will be manifested? Now, one solution is solipsism. Only the staunchest observer, the stoutest observer, the most powerful observer's choice will count. And that's of course foolish. We don't go that far. Then how can we solve it? For decades people struggled, and then if you say the idea that came to me one fine evening while talking to a mystic is the idea that solves the problem. Consciousness is the ground of being. What does that mean? Consciousness is one. It's the ground of being, all being, meaning that being may be object, being may be subject, all of it consciousness is producing. It's not only the container of potentiality that gives you the objects, but it's also container of the potentiality that gives you subject. In the process of measurement itself, number 2, part of the quantum worldview, in the process of quantum measurement itself, consciousness identifies with part of the object spectrum, namely the brain, in our case, and the rest of the object spectrum becomes object for the brain, us who are identifying with the brain, to experience. Brain has something very special. I identified it. It's called a tangled hierarchy. This was an idea that a computer scientist actually originated, but he couldn't figure out how to make a computer equipped with this concept. But the brain, I suggested, obviously has such a machinery built into it. The name that Dag Hofstadter, this computer scientist, gave this machinery is tangled hierarchy. Ordinary machinery that we can build in the laboratory are called simple hierarchy. We build by bit, a little thing, make a bigger thing, make a bigger thing, make a bigger thing. You are all familiar with that. That's man-made machines. But this machinery that the brain has is not like that. It's a circular machinery, tangled hierarchy. One thing acts on the other thing acts on the one. They both create each other. Now, why should this empower you? Because you see clearly that yourself, that you experience, okay, there's going to be some deterioration of that self, unity of the self through conditioning. We cannot help it. Brain makes memories, that's part of the measurement problem, and so there's going to be conditioning. So you are a conditioned self, but you also have this immediacy, self of immediacy, which is a representation of that one. In a sense, then, you are the one. And you are the one that chooses from potentiality the actuality. See what fundamental importance or fundamental empowerment we get from this. We can do anything. We can get a little carried away before we think that. No, not in our ego. Ego does not have causal power. But this consciousness as one, the one that become represented in the brain, that one, if you could understand the one and figure it out how to get access to that one, then you really can create your own reality. What does that mean? It's fantastic. You can be creative, creating ideas, creating new inventions and innovations. You can also change yourself. You don't have to suffer. We choose so many cases of meaningless unhappiness. And once we realize, no, we have the power to change, we can change. We can choose happiness instead of unhappiness. That empowerment depends on just this one thing, how to access this oneness. The tradition that we have, Indian tradition, is a very powerful tradition because the great sages not only said that there is oneness in the Upanishad, but just as quantum physics at once also gives you the epistemology, how to find the oneness, similarly the great sages of India, they also did that. I find a great kick, I talk about creativity as investigated in the West, of course, because they have done a very thorough job. So the credit must be given to them too. And certainly quantum physics deserves credit because we explain creativity today much better than the sages could. But if you read books like Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, you'll be amazed. And if you compare it with my book called Quantum Creativity, you'll see so many parallels. So 2,000 years ago, there is this sage named Patanjali who figured all this out just simply through intuition and through empirical investigation that he himself did, and his followers and his predecessors. In those days, Indian culture, Vedic culture was on basis of doing. And we lost that. That can we bring it back? So, what I'm saying is, number one is that consciousness is the ground of being, is the ground of being that chooses out of the potentialities offered to it, the particular experiences once choose, and that's what becomes the experiential reality. And reality happens because consciousness identifies with the brain in this process. So we have the self and objects for the self to experience. We create that, and we can recreate it. Huge empowerment. But even more empowerment comes if we don't restrict ourselves to the thinking that the rest of the world is only matter. Because that's not what we experience. Well, you can be stubborn and you can be a computer scientist, of course, and then you recognize only two experiences. In computer science, a human being is a machine, and machines can only experience sensing, not experience, of course, sorry. Machines can process only sensing and thinking, certain kind of thinking, not the thinking that we do, but computers can process symbols. If we cleverly already inject some meanings and let the symbols represent these meanings, software, then we can make machines think, and then we can fool ourselves to think that, well, we could be machines that have been programmed by nature through natural selection and Darwinian evolution. How stupid can we be that those processes can do that? But we do that, and with good faith, we write books and they sell and so forth. And that's how the scientific materialism has grown so much. But we can also think another way. We can think that just bah humbug, there is no evidence for it. Instead, we really do have the non-machine existence. We are not machines. Then we easily can see that no, the experiences really goes more than just machine experience, just sensing and thinking. Even in thinking, we can easily see that thinking is not just what is computable. There is also new thinking we can do, and no computer can do new thinking, which is called creativity. And what do we create? We create new meaning. So mind has a part, meaning, that is not computable. A huge challenge for computer scientists. I gave out this challenge many years ago, and initially, computer scientists would tell me, sure, we'll do it within a few years. Well, it has been many years. You haven't done it, and I tell you, you'll never do it. You will never do it. You will never let a machine find meaning from scratch. It's not possible. And two physicists, two scientists, one is more like a philosopher, they have proven it. But Roger Penrose, whose name you have already heard, he actually wrote a book, The Emperor's New Mind, and where he showed that no, a computer cannot process meaning. Okay, so what have you got? Two more experiences that are the basics of humanity. Those experiences are called, every woman knows it, men still sort of try to deny it, but they're called feeling, which is part of emotion. Emotion is feeling plus thought, and intuition. Now there's big debate whether you intuit or not, but even Murray Gell-Mann, who is one of the greatest particle physicists of 20th century, even he wrote a book on creativity, and he agreed that intuitions are for real. We should not deny it, because creativity makes no sense if you don't allow intuition. Now here is the thing, what do we intuit? What do we intuit? Why is it more than thinking? And you have to give it some thoughts, but if you think about it and you realize the reason that we call it intuition and not thought, although we can think about our intuition, the reason is we suspect that thought is not completely describing it. You take an object of intuition like love or beauty, and you try to analyze it with thought, and you find that you're not doing a very good job. It's impossible to do a very good job. And that also is a good lesson for you to learn if you want to get into feeling. You'll find that if you have feeling, that gives you another hold on this beast called intuition. And I would say it is a very illusory beast. It's very hard to catch on to real nature of this intuition. What do we intuit? Let's give a name to it. Things like love or beauty, we call it archetype. That's a Platonic word, very evocative word, I hope. You will remember the word as much as you remember the words thought and feeling and sensation. Archetype. In India, we give names which are even more evocative. Archetypes, we give the name Deva or Devi. That's the representation that we make to make it visual. But do we know what the Deva or Devis are? We debate, which means that we don't know. We don't know what Shiva means, we don't know what Lakshmi means. We have some ideas. So archetypes are in the same way. There are some ideas, but we don't really know them in thought. If we get into them with feelings, we do a little bit better. And so we become sold on the idea that there are 4 kinds of experiences. And all these 4 experiences we assume to make the quantum worldview concrete are quantum potentiality for consciousness to choose from. Now what you have done here is very crucial. See, the big question of course is, when you came to this conference, I don't know why you paid money to come here really, because quantum physics is hard, consciousness is even harder. So the fact that you are here shows how intelligent you are, that you are not afraid of either quantum physics or consciousness. Fantastic. So use that intelligence now to investigate this very interesting point. The point that keeps many, many scientists away from true understanding they could reach about their own being, that they are not machines. If they don't believe for a second, they just do it because there is a lot of vested interest in it. But really, you could seriously understand yourself if you allow the fact that physics has something to say about your life. But please listen now. So we had initially only the elementary particles. And we convinced you that their behavior is very peculiar. We experimentally measured it. The data was presented in the morning. So you convinced. And this wave and particle is real. But only for, you think, elementary particles. If you think it's only for the elementary particles, you are stuck. Of course, elementary particles make big macro objects, so you would not be too hard-pressed to accept that, okay, the sort of even objects at the macro level must be sort of quantum, but they are also approximately Newtonian. So you can rationalize that Newtonian behavior should then predominate behavior of macro bodies like us. No. Why? This is where these new experiences are very important for us to analyze. Mind in the form of meaning, intuitions, and feeling. If we look at them, we find that no, they are also very quantum. Very quantum. So this idea that there could be quantum possibilities of consciousness to choose from is not a vacant idea. It's a very powerful idea that can be backed up with data. What kind of data do we have? Well, lots. But let me just give you a simple thing that everybody constantly experiences and can experience because it just happened. Very surprising piece of data that Carl Jung discovered. It's called synchronicity. Synchronicity, Carl Jung said, is an event of what seems like a causal coincidences. What you can give any cause, why such coincidences happen. What is peculiar is that one event would be a physical event, And strangely, the other event would be an event of mental meaning. Now imagine this. Mental meaning, we can think, oh, mind is subjective, we create it. But the point is that there is a physical event. I have no way that I can precipitate a physical event. Nobody can assume that kind of power. And yet, these two things, which seems to be acausal, that was the way first synchronicity was enunciated, but we certainly can also say that there is a common cause for it. If consciousness is the ground of being, why can't we think this way? Consciousness chooses a physical event, and consciousness also chooses simultaneously a mental event of meaning, deciding to see meaning in that physical event. And that's what synchronicities are about. I once had a series of synchronicities in my life, which then helped me to formulate a physics for the surviving soul, reincarnation. Amazing string. If such things happen in your life, and it could, and it probably already does, except you don't pay attention, then you too will completely become a believer of the quantum worldview. Because this is the kind of proof we need. A physical event and a mental event, and they're joined by a common cause, consciousness. They're both possibilities of consciousness to choose from, and therefore these events can happen. And that's the basic idea, multiplicity of experiences, because consciousness not only is the holder of possibilities of matter, material experiences, but it is also the ground of the vital experiences, mental experiences, and even archetypal experiences that we call intuition. So at once we see it, we also see that every experience, as it is experienced, becomes a memory in the brain and we become jaded about it. Or for feelings, they become a memory in the body and again we become jaded about it. This is what memories do to us, a process that psychologists call conditioning. And then the question is, how do we get out of conditioning? How do we access new meanings and new meanings of the archetypal domain and new feelings? Every one of us here knows that we have feelings built into our brain, or rather emotions, negative emotions we call them. India, they recognized it long time ago, these enemies as they are called. Anger, jealousy, lust, all those stuff, competitiveness. They are negative emotional brain circuits. Today we give them more advanced name because we have found places in the brain where these things dominate us. So they are built into it. But suppose you want to create new feelings. Do you have that capacity? Yes, we do. New feelings are called love. New feelings are called feelings of nobility, noble feelings. Feelings that makes us compassionate. Feelings that make us see beauty. Feelings that make us good. Noble feelings, positive feelings, and with their help we can make positive emotions. So there you go. This kind of knowledge that we not only have sensing and thinking in the most elementary way, but 4 types of experiences, sensing, feeling, thinking with meaning, and intuiting the archetypal wisdom, we become immediately vastly greater than the machine capacity that computer scientists or machine scientists given. You want to express yourself in this new domain, then you do it through creativity. Conditioning is one thing, and creativity is the way to get out of conditioning. So what happened in the new science is that from the beginning I was interested in the creative process because my idea was, or experience was, that the two things are not independent. These ideas, of course, consciousness is the ground of being of possibilities, and possibilities consciousness chooses from. If you get into that consciousness, then you have the ability of creating new experiences for yourself. And I sort of suspected that we must be doing that in creativity. So when I analyzed the creative process, it was very clear. The creative process has 4 stages. One is Newtonian machine-like preparation. Machine can do it, machines do it all the time. And we do it, we could use just the machine capacity to do it because it's all about the known, what is known about something. We find that out because we'll need that for expressing when the new insight comes. We need to learn the language, for example. If you want to do physics, you have to learn mathematics. That kind of thing is called preparation. And then, surprisingly, the process has, this is empirical researchers have found, the process has a place which makes no sense. Preparation is doing, and creativity is, of course, concerned with the product, doing. But this second stage of the creative process says that we need to relax. Imagine that. Doing must be followed by relaxing. Why is that? Now here is where Freud's naming of this domain of potentiality became very important. Freud, with his wisdom, the great scientist, introduced a concept in science called unconscious. Now this concept did not exist. One of the things that the spiritual traditions missed, although there's some hint at it. Alaya Vignana, there is a concept in Buddhism that sounds very much like this unconscious. But anyway, nobody emphasized it, so we won't press it. But Freud had, and I told you already in the morning that Jung especially saw universality in that concept of unconscious, and now quantum physics is saying the entire domain of potentiality is unconscious in us. What is the definition of unconscious? Unconscious is objects as soon as they are manifest, but as soon as you are not looking at them, they become unmanifest again and unconscious. So unmanifest itself is unconscious. That's the quantum wisdom about it. But now what is quantum wisdom doing? Freud's unconscious is just repository of suppressed emotions and the bad stuff, suppressed, repressed trauma, all that stuff. Or the negative emotional brain circuits, all that stuff, bad memory. Jung's is a little bit better collective memory. But quantum physics is bringing you all this unexplored potentiality. Who talks like that? Only the mystics. You look at the Indian yoga psychology, you'll be surprised. They have the concept of superconscious. Yoga psychology constantly say, contrary to Western psychology where the emphasis is on therapy, yoga psychology says, why do you want to engage in therapy? It takes too long to clear up the unconscious of all these pathological conditions, suppression, repression, bad stuff. Instead, why not read elevated stuff, relax about it? That's what Patanjali discovered. Dharana is concentrate, prepare, and then relax. Dhyana, they call it, meditation. If you meditate, they said, insights will come. And they were completely right. This is what we have discovered in the creative process. If you do this dharana, concentration, preparation, and then dhyana, relaxation, that's what it means, really, relax. Quantum physics says it's unconscious processing. In the unconscious, possibilities can proliferate. This is what you gain by not thinking of the unconscious as memory. If you think of memory, then how memories can interact and proliferate, very difficult to see. But as unconscious possibilities, they do. In quantum physics, they interact. Possibilities interact with other possibilities and making whole bunch of new possibilities. You see how we choose the new. If we allow unconscious processing, our probability of choosing the new will increase. And then we have this creative insight, quantum leap. That phrase has been used already in the conference, so I won't belabor it. This is again a new concept because Mr. Newton thought everything, every movement should be continuous. But in quantum physics from the beginning, you have heard of Niels Bohr, picture behind me. Why is Niels Bohr such a great scientist? Because out of the sky, he discovered this concept of quantum leap. And ever since, we have to be absolute admirers of this wonderful man. Quantum leap, what is it? Quantum physics allows this continuous movement. Okay? So first of all, the signal-less communication. Second of all, that tangled hierarchy of relationship. And now this third, discontinuity. So take this idea that there is this fifth idea of three principles: non-locality, tangled hierarchy, and discontinuity. These are the things that are our tools of transformation, our way to use quantum physics to change our life. But those archetypes, love. I don't know how many of you tried it. In my life, that's one of my favorite archetypes. I won't go through any details because there is no time, but I hope you believe me, and those few of you who have looked at it will of course believe me. This is a very tough archetype. It's very difficult to love someone, especially when you want to discover nature of love itself. In other words, when you need to develop the capacity of loving more than loving a person. I have met many people, many women, because in the West, women are relatively easier to work with and collaborate with and so forth. And of course, some of them are so lovable. But to love as a generic, not as a specific, is very hard. To love like Mother Teresa. You go out and you see any destitute. You don't care how the destitute looks. You don't care if the destitute knows quantum physics. She sees a destitute and she loves him immediately and brings him back to dignity. What kind of a love is that? What kind of a love is that St. Francis loves birds, loves animals? We pretend to be lovers by pretending vegetarianism. That it pretends because are we really loving? It's for teaching us nonviolence. But we don't take it seriously. We are vegetarians, but when it comes to violating the dignity of another person, we do it. We don't walk our talk. We don't understand what the ancient people told us, what these great spiritual sages told us. But now science is telling us. And if you want to hear it, you really have to take responsibility that, look, this is really the truth. There are these archetypes, they're hard to learn, agreed, but still they are real. We have these experiences, we have creativity, we have the way to change possibility into actuality. And so you want to keep the archetypes forever as possibilities to choose from and never engage. You want to find out how to do it. Here it is, the creative process. Do it. And it's not that hard. Not that hard. So, fifth principle. Now, sixth one. Sixth one is evolution. You are anxious about the time? Are you taking too much time?
Yeah.
How much time do I have?
Maybe that's 5-10 minutes.
5-10 minutes? Okay. I'll try to finish in 10 minutes. So, so the sixth principle is evolution. Now again, evolution, just like unconscious, was in the Puranas. Puranas have a little bit of it. This theory of avatar. That sort of, we had a Matsya avatar, Kurma avatar. So that suggests that the Purana people who wrote Puranas, they sort of a intuition that maybe such a thing happened. We came from the animals. But of course, it was systematically put into a theory by Darwin. And Darwin's theory is a materialist one. If consciousness is the ground of being, then of course evolution has to be very different. And a couple of theorists, one in India, great sage named Aurobindo, and another one, another great scientist sage, Teilhard de Chardin, they sort of built the rudiment of what could be called a consciousness theory of evolution. So I looked at it and perfected it as much as I could. It still is not as complete as I wish to be. There are many aspects of it which could be improved. But still, it gives a basic rudimentary consciousness theory of evolution. And the new thing that you learn from this is that historically, anthropologically, the kind of mind that we have evolved through. This is not in Darwin, because for Darwin, it's all materialist theory, it's all material reasons, and matter does not include mind, so he doesn't talk about evolution of the mind. But Aurobindo does, and then we find that the mind has evolved from physical mind, giving meaning to physical, to vital mind, giving meaning to feelings, to mental mind, giving meaning to meaning itself, mind itself, which you also can call rational mind. Do you recognize yourself to be in this phase of our mental evolution? We basically live in the age of the rational mind. But now, please recognize among you this new interest. Again, why are you here? It's an amazing place to be. So many fun things to do in the great city of Kolkata. But you are here. And here we talk about consciousness. What is consciousness but an idea? What is archetype but an idea? Consciousness theory says that the highest mind that you can develop is give meaning to this archetype. And do it not only with mind itself, but also with your vital energy, with feelings. This is what we are engaged in right now. This is the one. And you can too. This is the one. People have been doing it for 3,000 years, and you can too. You can join in the process. And this is the evolution of human being in the future. Finding answers through archetypes. Can the mind engage in archetypes? What does it mean? Archetypes are not there for us to theorize, mentalize, even with feeling. They're just experiences. Archetypes remind us of transformation, change. And then the good news. We cannot do it in one life. Quantum physics says we reincarnate. Really, this quantum worldview, one of the powers is that you can develop, deduce a theory of reincarnation from it. Part of the memory that we have, they are non-local. They are not memory written in the brain. Instead, they are akashic memory. Recognize that word from our ancient culture, akashic memory. Quantum physics is justifying it. So we have these reincarnations. Time after time you come back and you can study these archetypes, and then you make a representation of archetypes in your being. That representation is called the soul. So this idea that we are body, mind, soul, spirit, or rather to follow the Upanishadic scheme, body, vital body, mental body, Vijnanamaya kosha, and then that is soul, and then the spirit, the one, the kosha of bliss, Anandamaya kosha. So that's the entire gamut of the human experience. You want to be stuck just with the gross pleasures of simple things. I mean, they're okay. We don't mind eating. We just had a wonderful meal. But why stop there when you have the mind to explore, understanding, creativity, feelings to explore, love, beauty, justice, truth? All these things gives us wonderful feelings, and then the archetypes themselves. Not only that, you have incarnation after incarnation to invest in the archetypes, and then you really embody them, and then you are changed. Then you are also able to love like Mother Teresa could. You could also be non-violent like Gandhi was. And that's our capacity, that's our potential. So I ran out of time, so I'll sort of quickly mention the last one that I want to mention. There are two more, but we can always violate the rules, but I don't think I should or need to. The last one I mention again is that creativity are of two kinds. One is the creativity to create an external product, and that is called generally called creativity. I call it outer creativity. But then creativity also can be directed inward to change you, new you, transform you, and that's called inner creativity. And I suggest that we use inner creativity for studying the archetypes. Now, why is this something new? In the olden days, we had the concept that the only archetype worth investigating is the archetype of self. And if you investigate the archetype of self, then your identity changes from the ego to this self of immediacy, which I call quantum self, or in Indian philosophy it's called the Atman. So ego and Atman, you go and establish your identity with Atman. And then when you realize that the Atman is Brahman, the individual Atman is actually the whole enchilada, whole thing, then you are enlightened. And that is the idea, only idea of spirituality that has been promoted in India, unfortunately. The new realization that is coming to people of quantum worldview is that the archetypes are very important, and if we investigate the archetypes, we also change. We don't change as much as the self-realization experience takes us, true, but we change enough, and we need that change today. We need really people to be nonviolent. We really need people who can love. We need people who can be fair. We need people who can feel abundance instead of creativity so that they can give. And we have this ability. So therefore, why just get stuck on this one aspect of enlightened living, namely living as a hermit, living as a renunciate? As that the story in the Buddhist tradition, Buddha was initially selling only the idea that everybody should seek nirvana, and somebody went to him and they had a huge argument, and he convinced Buddha that, look, if you do that, then you need to beg, because you have renunciated everything. You have to be a beggar in Buddha's philosophy. But who will give you what to beg? Who will give you food? And then Buddha realized the mistake, and he said, okay, you can also be a householder, and you can investigate these archetypes, and then you can get satisfaction. So look, even if Buddhism is telling that, Hindus never quite agreed with that idea, so we have confusion. But be it as it may. Now it's all changed. It's time of appreciating quantum physics and scientific way of looking at things, and we are doing it anyway we have to. This is the age of science. And science is telling us that. Whatever I have talked to you about, every bit of it has been verified already experimentally. And the little bits and pieces that have not are things that part of it already has been verified. For example, at one time we thought feelings cannot be measured. Today we measure vital energies. We measure auras. One time it was thought mind cannot be measured. Today mind is measurable. We are making huge progress in terms of measurability of this subtle domain of reality. We have to do a little bit of conceptual shift, that the subtle domain, there is no such thing as just that one concept. There is also other things. It has lots of structure. And if we invest ourselves into investigating this structure, we can then change the world much faster. Should we accelerate the change of the world? I think we have to. I just came from South India. It's hotter than it used to be. And look, everywhere, this global climate change is a huge thing. Terrorism is a huge thing. Economic breakdown, you don't feel that so much in India. India is doing okay. But it's a huge thing in the West. And politics breakdown, American politics, Trump can be a huge thing if you have a nuclear war between Iran and America. So all this is very serious things, folks. Take it seriously. Quantum worldview is telling you time for transformation has come. What are we waiting for? Thank you.
It was a wonderful presentation from Professor Amit Goswami. And as in the previous session, I'm sure that many of you, my very young participants here will have lots and lots of questions, and we have decided that the questions will be, well, at the end of both the presentations. But I must say that starting with his very strong, every point that he made, Professor Goswami was very emphatic, going against the materialistic view. And he started with the very basic thing, that is the uniqueness and oneness of the entire, the soul. He talked about, in fact, in so many different dimensions, and at each dimension he spoke about quantum. This was a word. We would very much like to know, sir, how the quantum mechanical processes will work in addressing some of these issues. For example, the feeling, all the abstract nouns that we talk about. But it was a wonderful presentation with long years of experience in this area. I'm sure that everybody had really loved this presentation. So let's give a big hand to Professor Goswami once again, and we'll have a lot of questions afterwards. Our next speaker is Professor Bernard Heisch. I will not take much time. He is an astrophysicist, and then he had his PhD from University of Wisconsin. Followed by that, he had a postdoctoral research at University of Colorado at Boulder. And then he had worked in Lockheed Martin Solar and Astrophysics Laboratory. He was a deputy director at the Center of Ultraviolet Astrophysics at the University of California at Berkeley. And very importantly, he is the editor of several scientific journals. But prior to his career in astrophysics, Professor Heisch had attended the Latin School of Indianapolis and the St. Meinrad Seminary as a student for the Catholic priesthood. I'm sure that now, after one worldview, we will listen the other worldview from Professor Bernard Heisch.
Thank you very much. It's really a privilege to be here. And I want to thank the Institute for inviting me. It's wonderful to be talking to you today. Now, I will tell you that my talk today is going to be a little bit more conjectural than the heavy physics that we heard earlier this afternoon. Now, that's, of course, the fun of it, because I'm presenting ideas here that are fun to think about, thought-provoking, and, in fact, may someday prove to be true. But I think you'll find it very thought-provoking. So I will present to you today my thoughts about a theory of everything in a kind of qualitative but very different sort of way. I basically want to present to you a heresy on top of a heresy. And you'll see how I think this might actually slice the Gordian knot of how consciousness arises and what its relationship is to the world at large. This is sort of based upon the approach that Stephen Hawking took in his book, The Grand Design, in which he makes the difference between a model of something that you study in the laboratory and the reality. Now, models can have a varying degree of complexity. You can have very complex models that you vary parameters on, so you can design something like a car or an airplane. Or you can have models that just have very few parameters that you have available. Different theories can successfully describe the same phenomenon through very different conceptual lenses. And that's going to be a direction of this talk today, that there are very different ways of looking at what appears at a glance to be the same thing. Many scientific theories that had proven successful were later replaced by others that were less successful theories based on wholly new concepts of reality, as Hawking and Lodinoff write in their book. And this has happened many times in the history of science. So, well, let's just go see where this takes us. As I mentioned, Stephen Hawking wrote about this, and one of his books of a few years ago talked about how we shall all be able to take part in the discussion of why it is that we and the universe exist as the ultimate triumph of human reason. Now, for then we should know the mind of God, he says. Now, I suspect that this was written as a mind of God kind of thing because it's better to have God listed in your book than to have an equation. Every equation takes about 25% of your market share, and every mention of God boosts the share. So I think he may have had that in mind, because he doesn't really believe in God as far as I can tell. He said, what I meant by we would not know the mind of God is we would know everything that God would know if there was a God, but there isn't. I'm an atheist. So I guess we won't have any opportunity to see any mind of God through Hawking's approach, but using the guidance of models, I'm going to present to you something that I think makes more sense. Well, what is the theory of everything? The theory of everything is a hypothetical, all-encompassing, coherent theoretical framework. It fully explains and links together all physical aspects of the universe. Now, finding a theory of everything is, of course, one of the major unsolved problems in physics. And by the way, note how the physicalist basis is taken for granted. The theory of everything is supposed to account for everything, and yet that everything is mainly molecules and atoms and forces and things like that. It's not really a theory of everything, as far as I can tell, in the point of view that there is more to reality than meets the eye. So I'm going to ask a question here. This is the key question of the talk. Can there be a consciousness-based theory of everything? A consciousness-based theory of everything. A bit audacious, but let's go with that. Now, the theory being proposed is based on consciousness not as primary, but as a sole constituent of our universe and other possible universes or realities. So I'm admitting right up front that I think that, this is reality, and we see in this room here is just a small slice through a larger reality. And on the physical side, I know the parameters. I'm an astrophysicist. I've worked for 30 years or more doing astrophysics research and served as one of the journal editors for the main leading journal in astrophysics. I based my theory also upon the existence of a vast transcendent consciousness, called a cosmic mind or a cosmic consciousness. That our true nature as beings of consciousness is what we need to learn and discover. And we are not matter, nor are we algorithms. And you'll know what I mean by not being algorithms when I get to the point of the paper that talks about this approach. Virtual reality is the creation of a simulation presented to our senses in such a way that we experience it as if we were really there. Now, what you see here is one of these sort of violent, and I hate the violent games, but it was a pretty neat image, so I thought I'd go ahead and show it. How a virtual reality capability and market and all of that is being developed these days. It's remarkable what you can do. I mean, within a few years, it'll be to the point where you won't be able to tell whether you're looking at reality or virtual reality. Last March, the Oculus Rift VR system was debuted, which heralded the arrival of a technology seemingly pulled from a sci-fi future. The gentleman looking through the glasses there wrote in the article, "I'm testing the Oculus headset in a mountain climbing simulation. The experience teleports me to a jagged cliff in a virtual world, so realistic that I can barely look down. When I do, my knees buckle and my palms sweat. Finally, my brain has to interrupt. Dude, you're not really there, man." But it feels that way. In his 2006 book, Programming the Universe, Seth Lloyd contends that the universe itself is one big quantum computer, producing what we see around us and ourselves as it runs a cosmic program. Now, this is where this whole thing takes kind of in my opinion, a nasty turn, because you're probably thinking now that I'm going to lead up to the idea, which scientists are beginning to approach these days, of having an upload of our brains into something cosmic, and having immortality by being part of a software computer system. That's not where I'm going with this. I'm going with this to some extent, but very big differences to be drawn between the suggestions that we're going to be uploaded into some computer someday and that there is a conscious being there that is involved in this process. Seth Lloyd states that we could, and he was a professor of mechanical engineering, by the way, at MIT, states that we could have the whole universe simulated in a computer in 600 years, provided that computational power increases according to Moore's law, which is a doubling every 2 or 3 years, something like that. Now, clearly, this number is way off. I mean, 600 years, it could be 6,000 years, it could be 600,000 years, it could be 60 years, who knows? So don't take that number with any grain of belief, but the idea simply is that the subject is growing and the capability is growing even faster. It's really becoming something that is not only saleable, but is something that might even be used as a research tool. And so virtual reality is coming of age, and the things it's going to do in the future are fantastic. I bet you 100 years from now, there'll be things that you can do with virtual reality in the world that will be absolutely astonishing. So a simulation hypothesis, the ones that you find talked about by Seth Lloyd and other people that are sort of the gurus of virtual reality, is that our apparent universe is merely a computer-based simulation being run by far more sophisticated intelligences. This is the bad side of this. I mean, I don't for a minute believe that our universe is merely a program running on someone else's computer. This is what these scientists are suggesting lies in our future. And I don't believe that for a minute, but that's kind of the direction that a lot of the thinking is going. And I'm going to bounce off that in a new direction that has a very uplifting, God-based orientation. The other part of the simulation hypothesis argues that we ourselves are no more than artificial consciousness. It's such a vast system, essentially deluding ourselves that we are real. That is, until the plug is pulled. And again, from Lloyd's perspective, everything that exists is the output of the universe's computer. As the computation proceeds, reality unfolds. All right, well, the idea that the universe is a simulation sounds right out of the plot of The Matrix. But it's also a legitimate scientific hypothesis. Researchers pondered the controversial notion Tuesday. I forgot which month this was, but there was recently an Isaac Asimov debate at the American Museum of Natural History. The moderator, Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of my astronomy colleagues, director of the museum's Hayden Planetarium, put the odds at 50-50 that our entire existence is a program on someone else's hard drive. Yeesh, I do not like that thought at all. Similarly, Google's machine intelligence guru, Ray Kurzweil, has suggested that maybe our whole universe is a science experiment of some junior high school student in another universe. Again, not to my liking. In this view, we do not actually exist other than as algorithms in a supercomputer. Okay, so this is sort of the modern day version of the brain in the jar. You know, there's mad scientists running around in some old sci-fi movie, and they've got someone's brain in a jar with the bubbles coming up and whatnot. This is the latest version of that. It's nice and clean. It's none of the scummy stuff, but it's still, after all, just trading our soul for electrons. And I don't want to do that. So it's bad enough to believe that your existence will end someday, but in the simulation hypothesis, you never had a real existence in the first place. And so, you know, your existence will end, but you never had one to begin with because all you ever were was something that was uploaded and this running away in the background on your on someone's hard drive, maybe many people's hard drive. Who knows? Now, consciousness is the one and only reality. Hence, it can never be explained. It is fundamental. This is one of my going-in beliefs here. And I happen to think that's true. But remember, this is a model we're talking about. And so as a model, I can kind of speculate and get a little wild without your thinking I'm totally crazy, because it is presented as a model. So, but in the first choice to make is what consciousness is, and I choose to say it's fundamental. That is, it's the first thing that happens. It supersedes matter and energy and all of that. In fact, as I'll get to later on in the talk, you'll see it goes deeper than just being at odds with that. I don't think we're going to need anything else but consciousness. And nothing else but consciousness is necessary, in my opinion. So this hypothesis eliminates the need for consciousness to emerge from a physical world via some mechanism. So I'm saying we don't actually have to ask the question, where does consciousness emerge, or how does it emerge from the brain? Because you have, if you're going to go down that road, you have the problem that you've got one thing, consciousness, creating something totally different. Consciousness is thought. It's abstract. And real things are supposedly, real hard things. They're the real stuff. And how can you make one out of the other? I don't see how they could have that ability. Or going the other way, of having the brain somehow emerge in some touchy-feely kind of way. But the brain and the mind have greater potential, are of a different category than the nuts and bolts of the world. Now, my view is that we and all living things are offshoots of a transcendent consciousness or cosmic mind. That includes not just us, but every other living thing. Animals, almost certainly. Plants, probably. There's not much there. Aliens somewhere else in the universe? Yeah, most likely. There may be many alien civilizations. But I think if so, we're all offshoots of a transcendent consciousness. And the reality that we take to be made of this physical stuff is actually a virtual reality. So what I'm saying is that the nuts and bolts that we regard as the universe that's here that we live in, that we need to explain scientifically, that is for real, is something I'm going to contradict. That it's really not for real. Nothing exists except the mind and its ideas, according to Bishop George Berkeley. Not that his saying it proves anything, but it's nice to have some. It's nice to have some big guns on your side. Here's another big gun. Sir James Jeans, a very prominent astrophysicist of the last century, who says, well, I'll select from the middle of the paragraph. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a great machine. Mind no longer appears as an accidental intruder into the realm of matter. We ought rather to hail it as the creator and governor of the realm of matter. So he definitely thought that there was something mental. In fact, he wrote about this in a mental way, but mental and spiritual, which is what the term Arthur Eddington used, pretty much mean the same sort of thing in this literature. So the idea that we are more like a great thought than a great machine, I think very much that's a very good view of things. And then Eddington, who one of my favorite scientists, here he is sitting in his garden with Einstein, is chatting, and the two of them chatting it up. Now, Einstein was not only a great scientist, one of the leading scientists of the last century, but he was also kind of a mystic. He was a Quaker, and he published a book on his spiritual beliefs called The Science in the Unseen World. And he was quoted here as saying, "I think that those who would wish to take cognition of nothing but the measurements of the scientific world made by our sense organs are shirking one of the most immediate facts of experience, namely that consciousness is not wholly or even primarily a device for receiving sense impressions." Written in a nice, typical, long-winded way that we as scientists like to do to impress people with our abilities and our research. But he's saying that consciousness is not wholly or consciousness is not primarily there to receive sense impressions of smell, touch, sight, sound, all of that. But it's there for a deeper reason. And I think that reason has to do with its being an interface between a virtual reality and a conscious reality. By the way, these are a couple of the books that Arthur Eddington wrote. The first one on the right is the Mathematical Theory of Relativity. Eddington was the one who made Einstein famous. He's the one who led the 1919 Eclipse expedition to measure the deflection of stars around the sun as the solar eclipse took place. So he did that successfully, just barely, by the way. The measurements are really kind of could go either way, but anyway, it was presented as being a measurement of the curvature of space. It's a very slight curvature of space as two images of stars went around the outside of the sun, apparently, during an eclipse where the sun was blackened out. So you could see the slight change in the stars' positions as they were deflected by the gravitational field of the sun. And on the other side, on the Mathematical Theory of Relativity, I meant to say on the Science of the Unseen World side, that's the book that was written by him about his spiritual inclinations. The Mathematical Theory of Relativity, on the other hand, is the book that was the textbook of relativity. So he was the one who made Einstein famous. In fact, he was asked the question once by a reporter, I think, well, Professor Eddington, there's a rumor that there are only 3 people in the world that understand Einstein's relativity. And could that be true? And Eddington looked at him and said, well, thought a bit over. Well, I know that I understand it. I just wrote a textbook on it, and surely Professor Einstein understands it. He did the theory, but I can't think who the third one is. So it's not bedtime reading. The essence of a computer is not electronics. That's just a platform. The essence of a computer is computation, which can be carried out by thought. So here I'm getting to the idea that a computer does all sorts of fancy mathematics for us via, access to electronics. Electronics does it, transistors and chips and so on. But that's not necessary. I mean, you could actually, you could be a computer yourself. You can sit there like the kids here, and you can say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and pose problems. You can even write algorithms that you could enact with your mind, and you can use your mind as a processor if you want to. Now, I don't think that's a very good use of my mind. But if you happen to be an intelligent, maybe infinitely powerful being, maybe the idea that you would conjure up universes through mental abilities, not necessarily take back mental, through mathematical approaches, that begins to make some sense, because the a lot of times in the last 100 years or so, scientists have commented, well, God seems to be so, or why is the universe so well described by mathematics or mathematical principles? And there's been this notion that mathematics somehow is kind of a basis for our physical laws. And I'm suggesting here in this little cartoon that computation can be the basis of an entire world. Well, what was virtual reality based upon? Well, software, algorithms, right? I mean, the virtual reality that these machines have is created by mathematics. At the basis, all mathematics. Electronics, yes, but even deeper than electronics is mathematics. Now, if God is a super-duper mathematical genius, as I guess some people think, I mean, of course, who knows, then God could, imagine for a second, God setting aside some part of his infinite brain and saying, I'm going to set up worlds for me to visit and, for me to live in and to experience my true nature. And so he could set up in his brain algorithms that go processing away, doing all the stuff that a computer does, except instead of having currents flowing in computers, you have God's thoughts flowing through his mentally formulated algorithms and doing the very same thing that Seth Lloyd says that that other intelligent civilizations may be doing, which is peeking in on us and creating us and destroying us by pulling the plug. Here we would have God doing something very similar, but not with any electronics, but because he is the most brilliant thing around, and doing this with his mathematical skills is probably a trivial thing. So I'm suggesting a way, a suggestion, in which you could have a very different perspective on what this reality is all about than one I pretty much ever heard before. I don't recall hearing anything about this, about God's possibly using his great mental and mathematical abilities to create universes via computation. And after all, if you can do a virtual reality, why go to all the trouble of making it real? I mean, virtual realities can easily be programmed and sold, but if you had to create a whole world to have experience happen, that's a lot of trouble. That's a big hassle. That costs a lot of money. Now, I don't think God is worried about money, but it could be a challenge. But why would you have to do a real world if you can, in fact, have something that's totally real in effect that you can create with your mind, with mathematical techniques and so on? And that would serve the very same purpose. And I'll go ahead and give you what I think the purpose of all this is. I've gone this far deeply into this already to get myself in trouble probably. But I think that the point of all of this is for some great cosmic intelligence to set up worlds of its own that it can then enter into as little sparks of whatever this conscience is and develop life forms in those different worlds and experience what it's like to be a physical being or to be a water being or to be something else. And the way to do it is to create virtual worlds, which I think, in my opinion, such a great being should be able to do that. So, but what does my opinion matter on that anyway? I can't. Well, never mind. Or here we have a rather different view of God. Now, most of the time you think of God as an old man with a gray beard and sort of a cross between, I don't know, Santa Claus and, something else. I put this young lady here just because, this is God computing, God computing. Why not have someone, that's very attractive to look at than some old, senile Santa Claus? So here God is computing God is computing her latest ideas about creating a new universe that would have a set of laws different than ours, because if they were the same as ours, why bother doing something twice? Set up different laws. And so here's God thinking about what her next project is. Astrophysicist Mario Livio wrote a book, Is God a Mathematician? And Mario Livio is a very bright astronomer. He works at the Space Science Telescope Institute. I know him. And he writes, I was simply presenting a mystery with which some of the most original minds have struggled for centuries. The apparent omnipresence and omnipotent powers of mathematics. These are the type of characteristics one normally associates only with a deity. And as I already pointed out, Sir James Jeans said the universe appears to have been designed by a pure mathematician. Albert Einstein wrote, how is it possible that mathematics, a product of human thought that is independent of experience, fits so excellently the objects of physical reality? And Eugene Wigner, the enormous usefulness of mathematics is in the natural science, or the enormous usefulness of mathematics in the natural sciences is something bordering on the mysterious, and that there is no rational explanation for it. So, if we did have we did want to get further evidence that this path is going to lead somewhere, there are things we could do. I mean, we don't really have a whole lot of tests for this theory yet. Not too much has been done along these lines anyway. But there's certain things that come to mind that we might elaborate on, like pixelated space-time. We do have Planck length, Planck mass, and Planck time, which are have definite values. Maximum speed, perhaps, because the speed of light. Well, we know that limits the motion of matter through space. But if things are really being created virtually, then objects that are very far apart, say 10 light years in your simulation, well, they're right next to each other right here in the computer. So there's no reason I can't talk to my colleague over here faster than the speed of light, because, well, actually speed of light would do, but the faster communication time, it's all right there. This would also solve things like entanglement, because after all, again, if you entangle two objects, two electrons, say, the program can calculate that now they're, again, 10 light years away from each other, but really they're on the same hard disk and they're on the same drive. So they're entangled because, after all, they're in the same computer. So I can entangle them if I want to. I don't have to worry about this vast distance. Processing limitations may be underlying the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. There's a bandpass limitation to all things. Particles of a given type are absolutely the same. I mean, all electrons are created alike, as are all the other fundamental particles as far as we know, which again is a mark of something that's being that's being developed by someone or something very bright. An inanimate digital supercomputer scaled up by, say, 10 to the n power, where n is something huge, like hundreds or thousands, versus consciousness choosing to act like a computer. These are the two choices you make in following this path or some other one to try to understand the nature of God and consciousness. Again, one operates via electronics, the other operates via highly structured thoughts. So we have God's thoughts playing the role of the currents and the potentials and so on in a computer chip. Our existence and environment is an illusion created by operation of the supercomputer. Again, this is the place where the high school student with a science project is creating us to do his experiment. Versus our existence as being 100% real. So in this view of mine, the world is not real. The world is virtual, but you and I are real. We're as real as you can get, because we would be the offspring of this intelligence that's created this in the first place for his and her own purposes. So this does not in any way demean us the way the being uploaded into someone's science project would. It's quite the opposite. It sort of enables us to collectively, together with our Creator, come up with worlds to adventure in, to explore. This could explain certain paranormal phenomena. If you have the data all being run in the same computer, why I guess telepathy would not be such a problem. Wave particle duality, entanglement, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, the role of observer and measurement. All these things, you can solve them like that if you have a model like this. And it unifies physical and spiritual views of reality. You can do a lot more with this kind of approach than you would with having to build things. Imagine, for example, well, I guess you can't really imagine, but we wanted to come up with something crazy like liquid fire. Okay, liquid fire. How would you make liquid fire given the physics of the world we live in? You couldn't really do it. I mean, I can't think of any way you would do that. You'd have to fabricate some other kind of world with different laws maybe to allow that to happen. But if I want to write about it, if I want to make this happen in a program that's a virtual reality, shoot, it's a few codes of, that's all, a few codes of simulation. So the very difficult thing is to inhabit or to fill out a world that some deity has created to live in. Very difficult things that are difficult to make physically become easy because they just become a matter of writing the proper code and letting the thing run. It's not difficult in a computerized war machine to do these sorts of things. As you open your mind and spirit portal via substances or practices, you can navigate through other realities. Well, Aldous Huxley wrote this, and if this approach is correct, then there probably are other realities, many other realities in principle, because there's no reason that there shouldn't be. And as Aldous Huxley says, you can probably navigate through other realities. At least he says he has. And so has a fellow, a physicist named Tom Campbell. I admire this guy. He spent 30 or 40 years working with out-of-body experiences. He was one of Robert Monroe's first researchers. He's a physicist, and he's deliberately explored about 30 different realities. So, and I have to take this with a grain of salt. I know the guy. He seems honest, and to me, he seems really together. But he claims to have explored 30 different realities. Maybe, maybe not. But I don't know, your choice. His cosmogony from his visits to other realities range from having highly constrained laws, such as our universe, to very non-physical laws. So a whole range of possibilities for the kinds of laws that would apply in these different realms. And higher universes tend to spawn lower ones. And there's always an origin event in the higher which cannot be explained in the lower. In other words, the Big Bang, by the way, which I believe in perfectly, it's a great way to create a universe, is the Big Bang. The Big Bang can only be explained up to a certain point because you can't go back beyond zero and see what its cause is. But if it's part of a larger reality that's already been created, then it's just sort of a booting up process. The Big Bang is booting up of the system. So that's one way of looking at this that Tom Campbell writes about. Yeah. So the ultimate purpose of all this, I've already alluded to that, is for the one and only transcendent consciousness to experience its potential and thereby evolve itself. Campbell writes about this in terms of a decrease in entropy. He sees this process as an entropy decreasing process, which then means this would somehow help the creator of all this to evolve. I mean, maybe the creator of all this maybe is vast, 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 but not perfect. Maybe trying to evolve itself through things like this, through us. Because it does say in the religious traditions that there's a God who loves us and wants us to be his well, not his servants, but worshippers. And I think to me, this kind of thing as an ultimate purpose does make sense. It makes more sense than the worshipping well, it makes more sense than that. Another point to be made is that anything that takes a very long time, by very long I mean 10,000 years, 100,000 years, a million years, how about eternity, which the religious traditions tell us is our reward, that sort of thing would not be a reward if you had to endure it. I mean, you can imagine something perfect being a very happy thing. But if it goes on for another million years, or in a billion years beyond that, that's no longer going to be pleasant. That's going to be hell. So the sure way to go to hell is to go to heaven. I mean, the kind of heaven that the religion traditions tell us, unfortunately. Some of them, not all of them. All right, so the physical world is real and all there is. The physical world is real, but other realities exist. The physical world is a technological-based simulation, and so are we. These are three possibilities that are left when you take away the one I was just discussing. Are you living in a computer simulation? Well, this book, or this article by Professor Nick Bostrom kicked off a lot of this talk about uploading human minds into computers and so on. And this was written up in the New York Times by John Tierney, and he wrote, "Until I talked to Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at Oxford University, it never occurred to me that our universe might be somebody else's hobby. I hadn't imagined that the omniscient, omnipotent creator of the heavens and earth could be an advanced version of a guy who spends his weekends building model trains or overseeing video game worlds like The Sims. But now it seems quite plausible. In fact, if you accept a pretty reasonable assumption of Dr. Bostrom's, it is almost a mathematical certainty that we are living in someone else's computer simulation." Well, I don't believe that, but the argument he makes for that is that, if it can be done, it will be done, and as there are more opportunities in the future, things that could be done will definitely be done, and so the 99% probability is that we're really not here in this room. We're the electronic versions of the brain in the jar. I don't believe that, but I do think that the approach I've suggested, wherein this whole thing is done by a deity with the intent of trying to experience reality and uplift and maybe involve itself, makes a lot more fun, and it's certainly a lot less nullifying than this kind of approach. So the last of the points on the viewfoil: the physical world is a consciousness-based simulation, and consciousness is all there is and includes us. That's my point of view. A little bit of quantum mechanics, as we've heard some already today, so I won't go very deeply into this. But if you have a light source and it shines onto a plate glass, typically about 4% of the light will be reflected. Okay, so for every 100 photons that get emitted by the light source, about 96 of them go through the pane of glass for reasons having to do with the optical properties of glass and low electrodynamics in general. 4 photons come back. Well, how does that happen? how do 4 photons out of every 10 know that, your turn, you got to go? And like we're up to coming up on 100 launches of photons, and we've only got two hits so far. Something is telling nature what to do. And we kind of get lost in thinking that this sort of thing is solved by our knowledge of physical laws, when in fact it's kind of difficult to set up some of these things, except if they were just code in a computer. They're very easy, they're trivial. It'd be trivial to have 4 photons every time out of 100, randomly, 4 random ones out of 100 appear out of the plate glass experiment because a line of code says, okay, I'm going to generate a random number, and if you are a 25, 50, 75, or 100, then you're going to be the one that we throw to the dogs and out the window. Now, the QED approach to this, Feynman's approach, is that like bullets, of course, I'm talking about bullets or quantum particles hitting the target one at a time, they create an interference pattern. Now the idea is if you have a slit, or say you have a two-slit experiment, and you're launching your photons one at a time, well, how can a photon interfere with its neighbor when it's long gone before any neighbor could possibly come through the second slit? So you may have one photon here, one photon there. They can't really interact with each other in the interference sense because they're very wide associated from each other. Well, how does it actually happen? Okay, this is now a quote from the Hawking and Lodinoff book, The Grand Design. And this is exactly what they say. Feynman realized that one does not have to interpret that to mean that particles take no path as they travel between source and screen. It could mean instead that particles take every possible path connecting these points. The situation at both slits matters because, rather than following a single definite path, particles take every path and they take them all simultaneously. Now here we come. That sounds like science fiction, but it isn't. In the double slit experiment, Feynman's ideas mean that particles take paths that thread through that first slit, back out through the second slit, and then through the first one again, paths that visit that restaurant that serves the great curried shrimp, and then circle Jupiter a few times before heading home, and even paths that go across the universe and back. This, in Feynman's view, explains how the particle acquires the information about which slits are open. Well, I appreciate the fact that the mathematics of this probably works out perfectly, but it's the stupidest thing I've ever read. I mean, well, okay. If you believe in, path integrals that go out to the Jupiter or the Sun and come back and explain the two-slit experiment, your view of reality is different than mine. So it seemed it would be difficult to hardwire this kind of physics, but again, a software algorithm would have no problem generating this behavior whatsoever. So I think I'm going to stop about here. Lastly, one of the mysteries of our world is how every photon of light, every electron and quark, and indeed every point of space itself seems to just know what to do at each moment. The mystery is that these tiniest parts of the universe have no mechanism of structures by which to make such decisions, yet if the world is virtual reality, this problem disappears. So I hope I've at least entertained you, if not given you something to think about. I think there's going to be a lot of future in this virtual reality business, one way or the other. And I'm anxious to go out and get my goggles, because I'd like to see some of this stuff myself. So I think with that, I'll stop.
So, thank you, Professor Heish. And now over to the participants for question and answer. Yeah, please.
It is very close. I have not read very much about that, so I really can't honestly say, but the little I've seen about it seems very supportive of this idea.
Michio Kaku has mentioned about finding these tachyons, primitive radius tachyons, so he found the existence of God. Somewhere on internet 2-3 articles appear, 2-3 mentions, but nothing else. Do you really believe in God based on watching some kind of these tachyon particles? Can we somewhere conclude that there is God? Are we stepping on something like God?
Well, you always are, because after all, you can't prove God. But you... First of all, I haven't heard about the tachyons. I mean, I know nothing about 3 different types of tachyons. I mean, I thought one kind was impossible. I had to find out what Michio wrote. But I think, I'm sure I've stepped on toes here just by what I've said. But this is something that's never going to be completely solved. Well, not in my lifetime. It may be someday. I mean, someday we may realize that, my goodness, we are conscious beings. We are not just automatons or machines. And then we'll have probably a different kind of civilization. And I hope that comes about. But as for proving anything here and now, I think this really takes us pretty far, though, to the notion that not only is such a thing possible, but it's likely. That this approach to creating a reality that would be would have a purpose, not just for us, but for the great creator of it all. It makes sense. And, well, we will see. Time will tell.
Thank you, sir.
Professor
What is your
Ghosh.
best guess on dark matter? What is inside dark matter?
Well, our dark matter, no one knows about dark matter. Our dark energy, I can comment on that, and that is that the infamous zero-point field has about the right properties to account for dark energy, except for the fact that it's 120 orders of magnitude too intense. That's 10 with 120 zeros behind it. But otherwise, it's got the correct properties. So there's some connection here between dark matter and the dark energy. Again, I don't see why. And maybe the quantum vacuum is playing a role here too, even though this huge 120 order magnitude discrepancy is it's called the biggest failure in science. But there's something still you can still hear people talking about it. So I think there's more to come. But I really don't know nothing about dark matter. I don't think you found anything positive about dark matter yet.
Yeah, Professor Ghosh.
If you think the universe is computable, then would it not be incomplete in the sense of Gödel?
Would it not be complete in the sense of what?
Gödel's theorem.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes, Gödel's theorem is a problem. I've never waded through it. It's enormous. But it probably would be a problem. I agree with that. And I'm not sure I know enough to get my way around that.
Yeah.
My question is to Professor Goswami. So you talked about archetypes, and at the end of towards the end, you mentioned that quantum mechanics kind of tells us to explore into this archetypes more. Can you give some examples?
Exploring the archetypes.
Yes.
We were having lunch and somebody asked the question of how do you explore beauty? So let's take that example. The first exposure how we have of something like beauty, what we hear from our parents, from our elders, what we read, and people say that, well, the sunset is beautiful, and people say flowers are beautiful, and for men, you very soon find out that the girls' faces look quite beautiful. Okay, so we have some standards of beauty. But do you actually see beauty? Now, I was a scientist from pretty early on, and they were all matters of what people say. But do you really see beauty? So for some time, I didn't quite know what people mean by it. And just as, you were asking from some honesty, I suppose. And so we don't know. And then one day you are looking at a sunset or you are looking at a flower, and all of a sudden that it's producing an expansion, a feeling in where your heart is. So in the yoga tradition, and we rediscovered it in biology now, in psychology also, we call it a heart chakra, a place where we feel the feeling of love. So then we are getting a little bit more added picture. Oh, beauty is something that also inside the feeling of love. And then, you go on looking at it, and you find, well, before you had the feeling that only particular things are beautiful, but once you learn to expand like this, transformation, it's amazing. Because you start looking at artist's picture, and you find that artists are not confined with what we normally call beautiful. Yes, they do draw pictures of flowers and sunsets and women's faces, but they also draw pictures which are ordinary. We don't see anything in them. And they somehow bring the beauty out of it when you look at the picture we see it. It's an amazing thing. So you wonder, okay, so artists already have eyes which see beauty where normally people don't see it. And then you read a comment by Vivekananda about Ramakrishna's eyes. And Ramakrishna, Vivekananda says, very beautiful eyes. What? I mean, you can look at Ramakrishna's face and photograph and nothing that special. I mean, okay, you can imagine it. But Vivekananda says, no, not that. But this, my guru, this teacher Ramakrishna, he can see beauty equally in a prostitute and in a Brahmin. That's very special eyes. So my experience is, getting towards that. My experience is that more we learn to look at things with this expansion in our heart, we start seeing beauty in everything. So it's an amazing progression through which the knowledge of the archetype grows in us. So stay with it. Initially it's very obscure, only what other people have told us, and then it becomes real because we see that something happens to us. And that's the investigation that I was pressing on you, because if you do that, it will transform you. So the way that the worldview is emerging, mystics already have always said that if you do certain things, they are not separate from you. So there are two ways of doing science. One is what Barney just beautifully presented, with all these people saying computer simulations, and then nothing happens to us. We just characters in a computer simulation. We don't have to do anything. We can kill each other, and that's the computer simulation. It all ends up in a nuclear war. What difference does it make? It's somebody's computer simulation. So that's one way of looking at us. The other way of looking at us is that, no, we have responsibility because we are creating this world. This computer, this programmer is not outside of something like the movie Matrix, and that's not it. We are literally doing it. So that way we learn how to get into the inner workings of the universe. What I'm saying is that these archetypes, not only that self-archetype, that one of course is emphasized in all traditions very much, but I think all archetypes can take us to an inner working of the universe. And once we learn to do that, the whole face of the universe changes. It's no longer no longer something about which you theorize, no longer something about you develop conceptual things and you feel great. It's something that you feel, that's something that you intuit. In other words, you now have access to mind of God that Stephen Hawking was talking about, except that this God is you, this God is your consciousness. This is not a conceptual framework to express things. Okay? I hope that helped. Yeah.
Well, my address is to Federer Harsh, and that is, you have used so many times the word that we are living in a computer simulated universe. But what we know about the unknown realm of the universe is through the satellite missions to outer space and breathtaking computer simulated images. Is there any other way to have such concrete informations regarding the dark energy, dark matter, and inflation, and about the singularity, all the important questions that are posed in standard model cosmology? I think computer simulation is presently, and grid computing method handling a large, huge number of data is the only option we have. Is there any other soft option or any other option?
I don't know, but what it does, I guess what would happen is that this got me thinking that there's a way to cut this Gordian knot between what is causing what consciousness and versus the materialistic interpretation of reality. And it seemed to me that I realized one day that it may not be possible to actually make these things, even for a deity, and almost even a deity, to make some of these things we regard as everyday components of the world because they're so natural to us. how do you make an electron that knows that another electron is so far away that you can, that they won't attract each other? Well, yes, you have, the path integral business and virtual exchange of particles and that sort of thing. But really, it seems to me, I've sometimes thought, God, it would be impossible to make all these things, really make them, make a sort of hammer and nails version of the things that we live with every day, that seems so natural and normal to us. But it'd be very easy to make a computer simulation of it. You don't have to design very much. Just write the code and it'll happen. And improve the code later on when you have the greater ability. So it's this crazy notion that it occurred to me that maybe it's impossible to actually make the things we believe to be the fundamental stuff of reality other than our own spirit. That our spirit is eternal, is the entity that's going, that our spirit is the thing that's going to enter into this reality and experience it. But all the reality stuff couldn't possibly be made because making it is self-contradictory, just like liquid water or liquid fire would be contradictory, or having an object that would change lead into, or some device that would change lead into gold. So, and I think I've probably wandered away from your question, but I think that was really a profound thought, that, making these things is not as easy as it looks, even for probably a God to do it.
I have got, a question to both of you. For example, what about the correlation between the sensory organs and consciousness? For example, a human being who doesn't have many of the sensory organs, no eyes, no ears, nothing. Now, how does consciousness, or how is it, correlated with, because the experience, the whole concept, it grows with the sensory organs. When you talk about all these, abstract realities, you can hear, you can see, out of that grows the consciousness. Now, without that, is there any concept of consciousness where there is no sensory organ?
Well, I'm not sure you can say that we all know that, because I don't think that any of us truly knows. Well, actually, in a sense, we do truly know. I mean, consciousness is what we're doing right now. And what else could it be? We're all conscious. And we're thinking, and thinking is probably the dynamics of the consciousness taking place. So I guess I would say, really, we can't define it better than we have, because it's the most real thing there is to us, is our consciousness. But then the second point you were making was...
without that, can consciousness get developed?
I see. From my view, it's not so much that consciousness has to develop out of nothing inside a physical world, but rather that consciousness comes in its own... It's sort of pre-made thing. Consciousness is what comes and...
So it has got nothing to do with the sensory organs.
Well, I think it attaches itself to all this. I think that it kind of takes over a body and learns how to interpret all these things, and that's how it learns how to live, is by experiencing more and more, as a baby does, the world around it, and know how to interpret it. But I don't think that's something that actually grows out of the material side. Rather, it's what enters into it from the spiritual side, using its environment as a growing experience.
Yeah, so anyone? Yeah.
My question is to Professor Hesh. That is, sir, if consciousness exists independent of sensory perception, then what is the necessity of a conscious agent? Why do we need us to exist?
Well, I think the point of there being us is that we've created a world here that has all sorts of possibilities. Okay, there are people, there are animals, plants, that sort of thing, all those sorts of things happening, and the idea is to create kind of, I'm going to use the term Disneyland, but don't do that too literally, because what we've created is a reality that has all sorts of possibilities that you can't have if you're not going to incarnate. If you were going to be a non-incarnating being, you'll never be able to experience going to a baseball game, climbing a mountain, going water skiing. God can imagine that, but he can't do it unless he comes down into a form that can do that. And so I think that is the whole point of this, that God creates a reality which will be conducive to his own both adventure, evolution perhaps, understanding what it is to be an infinite being. How else would you know what you are unless you learned what your capabilities could do? So I think that's why the need is for this being to create the vehicles by which he might experience this life. That's my view only. Of course, I'm not. Don't believe me because I don't know these things. God has not spoken to me, but I'm trying to give you my best thoughts on what it might be about.
Thank you. I have another question for Professor Goswami. Sir, you spoke of the unconscious and of the immense potential it can hold, but as human beings, we are essentially conditioned. So how do we access, or how do we begin to approach the unconscious? Because the meaning that we perceive is a function of our conditioning.
Could you translate it to me? I think it's not so good. Could you tell me what she asked?
Yeah.
No, I have. Why don't you tell me what she asked?
Yeah, can you repeat your question?
Yes, sir. I was asking that how, being as we are already conditioned and the meaning that we perceive is a function of our conditioning, how do we begin to access the unconscious, as you call it, or is there any way that we can?
Conditioning.
Wonderful question. So, our initial meanings all come from, of course, other people's meanings. But there is, of course, has to be something in us that encourages us to look at new meanings. Now remember, this is why it is important to recognize all the four facilities of experience that we have. These computer scientists generally are talking about the mind and the sensing, but they are not talking about feelings and intuition. The feelings and intuitions is where consciousness has to enter in order to discover that there are new meanings. In other words, there is a one-to-one correspondence between the world as is and the meanings that we give. So long as you hold on to that, you seem like a computer. We have no difference because the program already is there within us. The whole question is that are there things that cannot be programmed, namely feelings, and are there other things that cannot be programmed either, namely intuition. As soon as you put those things into the equation, you discover that, I have an experience where something is bothering me. Those are the experiences we call intuition. Meaning is there, one meaning has been given in terms of the known, but that does not somehow satisfy. That's your clue that you are interested in finding yourself, your other facility. You hold on to that and explore that. This is how you become aware that maybe what people are telling us, there is an unknown component to it. There is a new meaning to it. And that new meaning, the way to go to it is what is uncomputable within us. The feeling part of us and the intuitive part of us. Okay? So doing it is fairly simple. We have those facilities.
Yes.
They're not that unknown. Okay?
So last question.
My question to both eminent professors and in the field of consciousness and reality, many words we have heard. So this very conference and the inquiry of a human mind in search of something, in search of the cause of all causes. And it's very easy for us to understand that we are caused. So the question of consciousness, that we are in search, we are caused, this is very easy to understand. So how can there be just one consciousness? Because we are in search of our source, and which we do not know. So the very admission by the scientific community or the spiritualists that we are in search of our cause, that proves that we are not the cause. So there cannot be just a singular consciousness. It has to be multiple, by common sense. And I would like to be explained if that can be denied.
Yeah, I guess I would like to comment on
Yeah,
that.
that's a very good question.
The microphone still on?
Yeah.
It is multiple, because in this view that I presented, there is one great intelligence, Brahman, one Godhead, whatever you want to call it, only one. But this one being can launch billions and billions of worlds and other physical life forms. And I say that because I think, you can create kind of a shell of a being, like a car, and then the driver gets inserted into the car. So the driver is us. We are the little sparks of the great infinite cosmic consciousness. Now we're entering into the car that was built for us to drive so we can tear across the roads and have a good time, which is something God would probably like to do. But there is multiples involved. Of course, there are billions, and each one of us is one of these billions. And the reason that this can be done in the first place is here's the key to it all. God needs to forget that he is God. If he doesn't forget it, he can't play the game. If God knew he was God, out driving around in his motorcycle, I'm God, I know what I did, I came down to earth, and I got born into this family, got this motorcycle, gee, I'm not having much fun. Why is that? Well, because he knows he's God. But if you come into this life without knowing what you are, then you have this whole life experience to learn, and that learning could be an adventure in itself, or it could be a way to teach you how to be a better conscious researcher. So there's a good reason for it happening, and I think the only way that it can be done is if you forget who you are, because otherwise you can't play the game, and the game is just it has no fun and has no purpose if you know what it is, so you have to forget it.
So anyway, I'm extremely happy. In fact, there's more on consciousness coming next session. So that session is what is consciousness. So more of it will follow now, and we are already short of time, and we have taken more time in this session. I must thank both the speakers who have spoken really brilliantly, and equally brilliant were the set of questions, both in the previous session and also in this session. So thank you very much, and please give a very loud hand to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Ajay Kumar Ray, and we thank all the speakers for the wonderful session. Now we will felicitate all the speakers. Sir, I would request you 2 minutes from you. Yeah, felicitation. I would request the chairperson, Ajay Kumar Ray, to felicitate our speaker, Dr. Amit Goswami. Yeah. Yeah, we'll felicitate now our next speaker, Dr. Bernard Hesch. Now I would request Dr. Mundaraji to felicitate our chairperson, Ajay Kumar Ray. Thank you, sir.
I've got now 2. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for the session. I hope the audience enjoyed the session.